So how was the issue of culture shock for us when we arrived in Paraguay, and how have we managed to deal with it? This was a question that somebody asked us in one of our recent videos in the discussion thread, and it's a great question. It's something that I've thought a lot about and often considered making a video about. But the challenge for me has always been, how do we talk about this? Because there are so many different angles to this. So it's been on my back burner for quite some time. But when this question was asked on this occasion, I decided to do some digging to try and get some clarity around this and try and frame the discussion. And much to my delight, I've come across some research from a Canadian anthropologist named Kalervo Oberg that has really illuminated a lot of things that have kind of occurred to us since we've been travelling and considering this issue of culture shock. And I wanted to share this information with you because when I really think and look at the research that this gentleman put forward, it's really made me appreciate that this is a fundamental question that anyone who's thinking about moving to another country genuinely needs to get their head around. Because I don't know anyone who moves to another country who isn't in some way impacted by the issue of culture shock. In 1954, Kalervo Oberg coined the phrase culture shock in a speech in Brazil. And he identified this phenomenon as an occupational disease. Now, that probably gives some insight into who he may have been speaking to. And I guess back in those days, it would have been most common for people to move to another country if they were working in that country. But I know a lot of people were also immigrating. I don't exactly know why he came up with the idea that it was an occupational disease, but there you go. He also identified a whole range of symptoms that he said are common amongst those people who are suffering from culture shock. And what I found really interesting when I looked at those symptoms is I know of a lot of people who we've met along our journey who have exhibited various signs of these symptoms. Oberg also broke down this thing that he called culture shock into a 4-phase model, a 4-stage process that he says people move through when they go through the process of experiencing this thing that we call culture shock. In the first phase of Oberg's model, he talks about people going through a honeymoon phase. It's pretty understandable. You move to a new country, everything's new, shiny, and it's just like a holiday really. Each day is an adventure. He then goes on to say that following the honeymoon phase comes the negotiation or frustration phase. And this is a phase that really involves, I guess, a period of getting so used to your environment that now it's just like, this is all a bit hard. You don't know the language, the culture is foreign to you, your gut flora might be doing twists and turns trying to come to terms with the new food and water. There's so many changes that he says that you go through this phase of just going, oh my goodness, what's this all about? And how can I negotiate my way through just another day in this place? The next phase on Oberg's model is the adjustment phase. And at this stage, you're really saying to yourself, well, I'm here, I've got to do what I have to do to get with the program. I'm going to learn a language, going to just accept the things that I can't change. So you're in the process of changing yourself. You're being tempered by the place and you are being changed effectively in your new country. And the final phase of Oberg's model is the adaptation phase. You've mastered the transition to the country. You've learnt the language, you're used to the culture, you're done, and you've made it through. Oberg further developed his theory to talk about three distinct groups of people who go through the process of culture shock. Well, the first group of people he talks about actually don't make it the whole way through. They actually fail to get through it. He calls them the rejectors. They're the people who tried to make it in a new country and they couldn't. They rejected it. For whatever reason, it was just too much for them. They either couldn't adjust to the culture, they couldn't learn the language, their system just couldn't cope with the new food or the water. Whatever it was, they rejected the country that they tried to move to, and they failed. And interestingly, in Oberg's estimate, upwards of 60% of everyone that goes to another country actually falls into the category of rejectors. They actually failed. Well, I don't know any way that you can verify that sort of number, but at least in our observation and experience, it is a significant percentage of people that do try and move to a new country, whether it's Paraguay or anywhere else, and just don't make it. It's a significant number. I don't know if it's as high as 60%, but it's definitely in the double digits. The next group of people that Oberg talks about is the adoptors. The adopters adopt their country. They take on the language, the culture, they integrate, they become part of the country. And this particular category, Oberg estimated only a minority of around 10% actually make it to that stage. They are the people that have really got it all sorted. And then the last category that Oberg identifies are what he calls the cosmopolitans. The cosmopolitans are kind of people that have brought some of their own customs but adopted what they needed to in order to get through in their new country. So they're kind of sneaky. They've taken an each way bet, but they've made it. And considering that this study was done in the 1950s, I guess today's equivalent might be something in the realm of like a digital nomad, people that are traveling around and laying their hat down in certain places, for certain periods of time, but you know, for a period of time they will consider that place to be their home, but it's not their forever place. They're cosmopolitan. They've brought some things from their own country, but they've obviously adapted enough in order to make a go of it in that place for the time being. And that category he put around 30%. Now what's interesting is when I think about those categories that he's designated, I fast forward to 2025 and I wonder, well, what other categories are there? And I would argue that there might be one additional category that you might consider adding to the list of people that experience culture shock. And that category I would call the in-betweeners, the ones that have neither rejected or accepted the place where they've tried to move to. Because in this day and age, you can move to a country and set up shop and often work online, surround yourself by people who speak like you, and you can stay in a certain stage of suspended animation. You're not necessarily a cosmopolitan because there are people who will come to new countries and be here for years and never learn the language or not really experience much of the culture. Pretty much stay separate from the country, but they're physically in the country, but everything else is kind of done outside of the country in terms of their income and a lot of even their social activities, because nowadays you can live a life online, but in addition to that you can surround yourself by people who speak your language. So I don't know, just something to think about. I think that there might be additional categories that are with us in 2025. So back to the initial question, and that was, how did we find things in Paraguay in terms of our cultural shock, and how do we manage it? Well, to answer that question, I really need to just backtrack and talk a bit about my experience in terms of my cultural identity, as I would see it. And also, I think I'm speaking a lot for my wife as well, because I think she shares a similar sort of experience. Over the course of my life, there's been a number of experiences that I would best categorize as minor epiphanies when it comes to the issue of my cultural identity. The way I would probably best describe them is, it's like Truman. There were a number of times where he almost worked it out. He looked around and he knew something wasn't right, but then he decided, hey, it's just easier just to get on with things. So that's kind of like how I've rolled over the years. I've at times had certain key moments where I've seen the chink in the reality that I was living in, but just went back to it because that's what you do. But a key event for me was I returned back to the place that I was born a number of years ago. I'd been living outside of that country for almost 10 years. In the time that I was outside of that country, I remember thinking back to that country that I had been born in, and I had certain ideas about the realities of the culture that I'd come from and that I identified with. And an opportunity came up in, I think it was about 2017, to go back there. I was actually quite excited because there were certain things about the culture that I identified with that I was really looking forward to experiencing again, being reunited with. Off I went back to the country of my origin and spent some time there working and travelling in various parts of the country. But what really came home to me like a ton of bricks was that the culture that I identified there no longer effectively exists as far as I'm concerned. The things that I identified as being that of my culture, I couldn't see them there. Some of the fundamental things that were just so important, like bedrock, they've gone. And that was like a major epiphany for me, because I actually came to the realization that the things that I had come to believe about my culture, and in turn myself, were kind of either myths, stories, legends, or things from another time that had been imported into my lifetime, to that current day and age, often just to achieve an end or to keep a story or a meme going for some benefit or another. But whatever the case was in terms of what happened to that culture, it's gone now for the most part. That country is nothing vaguely like what it was when I was growing up. And I know it'd be easy to say, well, you're just an old fogey that's out of touch with what's going on. Maybe so, but regardless of whether you would say that or not, the truth is that the culture there has changed so much that it's almost unrecognisable. Culture is a transitionary thing. It's not set in stone, and it's very easily changed, because the country that I'd been living in, give you a hint, it's a little country next to the Great Southern Land. In a very short space of time, I think it was less than 10 years that I was living there, completely transformed into another country. And now you can hardly recognise that country if you went to it, compared to what it was like when I went to live there in about 2009. And with that realisation came kind of a freedom, because I realised that I'd swallowed a whole lot of, really just myth about myself, about that country, and so many other things. So the question was, how did we deal with the issue of culture shock when we came to Paraguay? Well, I think that we didn't really have much culture shock. If anything, I've been watching the culture in Paraguay and really delighting in the fact that we're seeing a country that has a lot of authentic culture. Because, as I may have said earlier, I believe that culture can be authentic or it can be contrived, or it can start out being authentic and then it can be co-opted. Well, the culture in Paraguay, I think, for reasons that are far beyond the scope of this video, have largely been left to their own devices. The people here are doing things that they've been doing for generations. They have certain attitudes and customs and values that are really rare when it comes to comparing them to other places around the world. So, if anything, I've delighted in being in a country where I've been watching people go about their lives and living out their existence alongside what I would consider to be a lot of genuine behaviours that have emanated from original organic culture. And I've really enjoyed that. So why is this video so important to anyone that's thinking about coming to another country? Well, you only have to come and look around at many of the people that make the move. And when you look at the symptoms of culture shock as explained by Oberg, I don't think there's any shadow of a doubt that he's onto something. If you go onto the expat forums and groups that are so prevalent in Paraguay and other places, you can get some great information. There's some awesome people in there, a lot of helpful things. But my goodness, there are a ton of skitsy, nerve-ridden people who are reacting at shadows and just kind of acting out what I think are some of the classic signs and symptoms of culture shock. Jumping at shadows, accusing people of things, being defensive, being argumentative, not wanting to accept reasonable, rational advice. These things are so common in and amongst the foreign community that we have known, both here in Paraguay and in other countries, that I would encourage anyone that's coming to a new country to really examine where they're at. Because if you don't, I believe that there's a real chance that you could end up being impacted by this issue of culture shock in a way that you could exhibit those symptoms. That's not a good thing, because the last thing you need when you move to a new country is to have head rattles, to jump at shadows, to be scared of everything, to be argumentative, to not be able to form relationships because you don't trust anybody. Yeah, I accept that sometimes these are just the head rattles of people online, and social media is a wonderful servant but a cruel master. And it is not uncommon to find kind of totally unsociable behaviours on what we call social media. But regardless, I do absolutely believe that the symptoms of culture shock are alive and well amongst the communities that I have had anything to do with. And the sooner that people get their head around this phenomenon, accept it as a real thing, and do what they have to do in order to deal with it in their own lives, the sooner that they can get on with their lives. Recognise the degree to which the culture that you've come from and identify with has shaped you. What are the things about you that have really become ingrained and are part of your cultural identity? Because it's not uncommon that I see people who come to a place like Paraguay and they come from another place, another culture that's so incredibly different. And that right there can be a real rub point. That can get you in the second stage of Oberg's model, which is the frustration negotiation stage. Now, the more that we can recognise those traits in ourselves that have come from possibly our cultural identity, well, the sooner we can at least be trying to work through them, maybe firstly identifying them and then maybe adopting some strategies to at least mitigate that issue. The second thing that I would do is reflect on how you have taken on those identities, because at least in my case, the more I reflected, the more I realised I'd just taken on a whole lot of stuff that had been kind of concocted or at least manipulated. And the more that I worked on myself to at least minimise the degree to which they influence me, my behaviour, my outlook on other cultures, the better and easier it was for me to come to a very strange and foreign place and just go, well, this is cool. I'm happy to be here, and look at all the cool things that they're doing. Look how they do things differently here, and in many ways are preferable to the place that I came from. It's only once you really examine yourself and reflect that you can really identify that to the degree that I think you need to. And the last thing I'd suggest is, once you've done that recognition and reflection, take what is good and useful from your cultural identity and keep it, and everything else, biff it. Chew the meat and spit out the bones, because it is a fact that a lot of people that I see from different countries bring different attributes. I won't name the cultures or the countries, but the country that I came from is no different. And the last thing I would say about this topic is, as long as you are impacted by your cultural identity to the extent that it holds you back in terms of integrating with the culture of the place that you've moved, well, the longer that you are, in a sense, a captive of that identity, and perhaps even the people who handed it to you, or at least manipulated it in ways that weren't to your benefit. So I know that there's a lot in that, and it might not make sense to everyone out there, but I am absolutely certain that Oberg was a light in the darkness when it comes to this topic, because it's something, as I said earlier, that I have been really wanting to talk about for quite a while, but I just didn't know which end of the octopus I was going to grab, because there's so many angles to it. Where do you start? But the way that he has put it on the table and unpacked it makes perfect sense to me, and everything gels with what we've seen since we've been moving, both with other people and ourselves. So I would really, truly encourage, I'll leave some links in the description below of some materials in regards to some of Oberg's teachings, and I would have really benefited from having just availed myself of the realities of what he talks about there. I think there's some probably other things that could be updated from 1954 when Oberg first came up with his theory, but essentially it's with really frightening clarity and accuracy that we see a lot of the things that he talked about, and I think that he was, for the most part, right on the money. So there you go. I know that could be slightly controversial in this day and age, talking about things like culture. My goodness, I don't know where that could land me, but I stay sufficiently vague to hopefully keep out of trouble. But at the end of the day, we're all people and we all have something wonderful to contribute and something terrible to get rid of. So that is our challenge and your homework, and something that I'm continually refining myself, because as of this date, I'm still on unfinished work in this regard. I have got this horrible speech impediment that I call an accent that I don't think I'm ever going to be able to flick off. So thanks to my previous culture for that, I'm just going to have to cop that one. But there's some other things from the place that I was born in that I kind of love and I value. And that's kind of nice, but I don't take it too far because I recognise it for what it is. And in time, I hope to become just a bit of a Paraguayan, because in some ways, ironically, the way that they roll is more like the culture that I identified with than the place where I originally came from. Paraguayans are really chilled. They value friendship and looking after each other. They're not overly materialistic. They have a healthy disregard for authority, although they stay on the right side of things. And they just roll pretty loosely and with an air of casual happiness. And although I can't claim to have been all those things in my former life, they're definitely things I aspire to, and they're probably values that were more consistent with the place I came from maybe 20, 30 years ago. When you go back there now, you can't recognise a lot of those things and other things that people would commonly say are the values of that country. I wish you well in your journey and hopefully a swift passage through the 4 stages of culture shock if you happen to move to another country, because I think things will be far more pleasant when we're on the other side. So until next time, take care. Ciao.
Smoking